I'm going to say thank you so much for the invitation, Piers, and I'm very happy to be with my dear friend and colleague, Qussay. It's really a treat to be in conversation with him. To address the first question about Mohamed Choukri, and I'll just give a brief biography, and throughout our conversation, we're probably going to always refer back to his life. Mohamed Choukri was born in 1935 in a village, Aichiger, which is in the Rif region of Morocco, not far from the city of Nador. And around 1942, Shukri and his family moved to Tangier. And around that time, we're talking about the time of the famine in Morocco. A lot of people are moving from villages to cities and to be able to survive. So it was a very, really hard, difficult time. Upon arriving in Tangier, his mom, as some of you probably that have read Al Hafi, um, promised him that there is bread in Tangier. So they arrived to Tangier. He was with the family, and also like there is the episode really between the city of Tetuan and Tangier. We might get to that. But he ended up later in the streets of Tangier, and he's practicing everything one would ever imagine, like a homeless child sleeping in the alleys, practicing the act of stealing, working all different coffee shops, shoe shining, did all different kind of things, really, all different of things to be able to survive. And at the age of 20, and we may probably get to that, he went to the city of Larache, which is not far south of Tangier, and to start studying in elementary school to study Arabic. And then moved back to Tangier. He was a school teacher. And at that time, as you probably know, even prior to that, Tangier was an international city, and um, Shukri taught Arabic, and he started practicing writing. But he had a very difficult life, and we could see that in a lot of his writing. So this is just like a sort of really brief bio, and we can get to that. And just to come back, so he died in November 2003. And the stature of Shukri, I mean, one of the things I would say that Shukri has been really marginalized in the canon of Arabic literature. And as a lot of people would probably like know this when you look at the canon of literature, though he had or he produced a lot. And when it comes to that, there was a marginalization specifically around sort of the topics he dealt with. For some people, his writing provides sort of raw and filtered account of things, among Morocco's like most marginalized. And Shukri was the champion of the marginalized. And one of the things that whenever you had a conversation with anybody, everybody know Al-Khubz Hafi, or Paul Ball's translation for bread alone. And Shukri himself, on numerous times, he would say for bread alone, or Khubz Hafi, La'inat is my curse, because it overlooks or overshadows other work, or eclipses other work, including what we're going to be chatting about today, which are the short stories. Any conversation I've had people around the world, either Arab speakers or non-Arab speakers, people always refer to Al-Khubz Al-Hafi for bread alone. That's the only thing. People are not aware of his play. People are not aware of his literary criticism. People are not aware about the poetry that actually Shukri wrote. Short stories themselves really been overlooked even in the scholarship, or even the other two volumes in his autobiography with Zamal Akhta, Streetwise, and Wujuh Faces. And we can really get in a conversation about this, but he's very unique. As far as I'm concerned, I think it is. I call for sort of a reading from Mohamed Choukri, and because of the his contribution, and mainly his contribution really to Moroccan literature in early. I mean, he started writing in the 1960s, and we can get to that. Same time as actually Mohammed Zafzaf as well. So
Thank you. Thanks, Jonas. You mentioned For Bread Alone, the book that made Shukri very famous, both in the Arab world and internationally, especially in the Paul Bowles's translation. And you mentioned, and you are correct, that Choukri is known primarily as a novelist, but that he was indeed a skilled short story writer. And so my question to you is, do you mind telling us a bit about the significance of the short stories in Choukri's oeuvre?
Absolutely. So I probably will talk about that, and I'll talk about early probably publications. And I said earlier, even in the city of Tangier, just to say that he was always known as Sahib al-Khubz al-Hafi, so sort of the writer or the author or the owner of For Bread Alone, al-Khubz al-Hafi. And again, here I'm really using For Bread Alone and not really sort of the translation that I want to see for that specific like book, but I'm just using because a lot of English readers, that's really the title that's available right now. Short stories really, really important, or even short narratives to a certain extent, because Shukri also has a technique that's a little bit different than Yusuf Idris or Tamir Zakaria or others, just Zakaria Tamir or others, and we can probably go to that as of kind of like a subgenre or something that's really unique that need really to be studied. That's what I call also what are they really short stories? Are they short narratives? There are a lot of conversation to be had. One thing that I would say, the first short story that was published was Al-Unf ala Shati, Violence on the Shore. And just to get in terms of that. So this is really sort of the early thing that Shukri experimented with. Shukri experimented with writing short stories prior to writing anything that's longer. And in that's 1906, Al-Unf ala Shati, he sent the short story um, to Suhail Idris, to the Beiruti, magazine Al-Adab. And Suhail Idris was really fascinated by this. And one of in the correspondence was like, this is really daring. Because remember also what really Arf al-Shati deals with are things that are taboos. There were not really people writing about this at that time than Shukri, and we know that. Like all this stuff that's like really super taboo, talking about an act of sex on broad light in the beach and all different kind of things. So this is sort of the first experiment, though we can go to this about his writing, how he started, but he actually published things prior to that in the Moroccan newspaper Al-Alam, and he had a bunch of very short pieces that were actually published there before Al-Aruf al-Shati. The I in some of the writing and including the edited volume that you were part of, I speak about how this is really important for Mohamed Choukri's craft, and yet it has been overlooked by a lot of people in scholarship. If you were a person to do research, you're going to see a lot of things that attracted the attention of all scholars for many years, really, and not kind of like not surprising is Al-Khubz al-Hafi, and we can probably list most of the work. Akbib is the early person that really dealt with the on his article on Journal of North African Studies that dealt really with the short stories, in addition to the one that I have in the edited volume. So to me, this is an important, really, I would say in his oeuvre, it's really important. Short stories are important. And the other thing I'm going to say here, what the short stories really do as well, they are sometimes short vignette, and this short vignette are actually the focus on specific things. And we can give a lot of examples in like you would see Mohamed Choukri in terms of styles that he has like sort of blunt spear sentences to evoke deep social critique, and also um, as I said, they're less widely studied, but they're essential and revealing part of his literary project. So I really think that this is absolutely important. It's part of the entire sort of project. And what we have really here, just to say something, we have Majnun al-Ward, which was published in 1979, and we have Al-Khayma, which was published in 1985. So these are the two, and you really see sort of like, this experimentation really, or experimentation with this genre of short stories. And one of the things I'm going to just say quickly about it, just to say something like there is the beginning and end, because when we're thinking about short stories, there is a sort of like formulaic that people will have to follow. But what you've seen, Shukri, is really important. Sometimes you're just like getting the short story and you're like really thrown in the middle of the event. You have no preliminaries, no preliminaries, and we see that in some sort of stories. But it's really, I felt one of the things that really attracted me to this work because I thought it's like the writing style, the direct raw account, and many things. And I think they're really important. And I encourage people really to read like Mohamed Choukri's actually short stories. And if I'm doing anything, I'm trying to have this conversation to redirect our focus from specifically Al-Khubz al-Hafi to other part of things. Shukri is not only Al-Khubz al-Hafi as we see it in every part of the world, but there are a lot of things to be studied. And I can say more, but I hope this kind of answer this answers part of your question.
It does. It does. Absolutely. Thank you. And I want to ask you next about that last part that you mentioned about the challenge of translation. But I do want to encourage the audience, if they have any questions, to list them in the Q&A, and I will get to them as well before and after I ask Jonas to read some passages to us from his wonderful translation. Um, so, Jonas, celebration and contention always come to mind when it comes to translating Mohamed Choukri. This has been part of the reception of Choukri. And as you approached this work that you translated, how did you deal with the sort of specter of other translations and translators and the expected reception of yet another Choukri translation?
That's a really brilliant question. I mean, one of the things I'll probably talk about the process and how I approach the short stories. So one of the things really, I've really, really this work early in the 2000, way early, and specifically the short stories. And at that time, I've really find like some fascinating, really short vignettes, short narratives. And I always go really by stories and vignette. And I really sort of fascinated. And I've always thought of like friends and other people that I have. I would really tell them a story about Shukri. They can't be able to read it in Arabic, but I have to give them sort of my own translation at that time. It was sort of orally. So I felt it was really good to actually get this really into the hands of English readers and people can be able to read that. And I'll come back to sort of translation because we're literally looking here at Mohamed Choukri specifically, and I'll talk about what has been translated before and how I sort of dealt with that. So you have, as we know, you have Al-Khubz al-Hafi by Paul Bowles in 1973. It's a unique story. If we have time, we can get and talk about that because you really didn't have the Arabic till 1982. You have the French by Tarab and Jalul Le Pannu that you have published, which kind of really not to diverge from the point to come back, but it was really very important for Choukri because at that in 1980, Choukri was invited to La Postrophe, which is a very prominent, famous, show in France by Pivot, and there is actually a video there. But just to get in that, so you have that. Then you have the sort of the memoirs. You have Paul Bowles in Tangier, Tennessee Williams in Tangier, Jean-Jean in Tangier. You have Ed Emery, the translation of Al-Shattar or Zamal al-Akhta, by Ed Emery. And then you had that's the work that you had because you didn't have anything for lyricism, which is Riwayat Shahr al-Abyad, nor the play or other. So when I started really doing this work, I'm aware of the work of Paul Bowles and the problematics with it. In an article you wrote yourself, you really dealt with this domestication of foreignization, and you really brilliantly look at this concept of foreignization and how sort of like Paul Bowles really approached to foreignization, right? People would want you to feel that you're reading a foreign text, but you really, the way you dealt with is brilliant because you say, though this approach looks this way, but there are a lot of things we need to understand about Paul Bowles' approach to translation, which is important. So I'll come back to sort of my work. One things that has happened is some of the stories that we have, short stories, were translated by Paul Bowles in five eyes, right? And some of them is الجثة الغريبة, شهرزاد شهريار. So these are things that were really translated there. But when I was doing the work, I didn't have even five eyes. I did not look at that, which is really super important because one of the things I really try to do myself when I'm doing work, I know there are things in Spanish, there are things in French I can go to, but I try really go straight from Arabic without having any sort of influence, right? Any sort of direct influence or the question for me, let me see how this person might have rendered this verse in French or Spanish because it might help me a little bit. I really stay away from that. I stay away from that so I don't have any sort of biases, if that makes any sense. And of course, you and I know the act of translation has a lot of things. There are a lot of impacts. There is the question of positionality. We are putting ourselves there, and all these questions we can deal with when it comes to translation. But really, I took the task of, having sort of the Arabic text that I've read multiple times to actually understand the text. They are texts that are really anchored in Moroccan culture with all the diversity. Remember, one thing of Shukri as well, just to come back to this, you would have a text that might have, Moroccan Arabic, Modern Arabic, it'd have the Rifian, uh, which is really important, the Amazigh, so it'd be the Rifian dialect there, but it would have also Spanish. So you really have this sort of multi linguistic, if I could say that, maybe even some is multicultural, where you have all this in translations. These are all things that really present a lot of difficulties, including, the types of daggers in the Rifian. Which one really is he referring back? Just to give you an example. So also, it really got me to do research as well and talk to the people from the region, people that are like speaking like Rifian, and actually asking all these different kind of questions. Now, when it comes to that, then we might really get a chance, but later I went back and I kind of look at my sort of translation vis-a-vis Paul Bowles, which is really cool to look at it as a sort of study. Though again, I say Paul Bowles only translated very few short stories to see what kind of like sort of language, what kind of decision really being made, in the translation, what to keep, what to omit, what to change. So I've looked at that as well. And as you know, the task of translation is so arduous and very complicated and complex that sometimes some of the really short stories they have more than 10 drafts. Some really went to 16 drafts because I'm not really feeling that I'm really conveying this, because you also want to get the sort of the spirit of the original text to carry there, which is still a task. Because at the time, as you know this, in translation studies, you're actually creating a new text. You're putting sort of a spirit in new text. And that's really the point here. But you want that sort of spirit really to sort of, the spirit to carry on in terms of your own translation. Just to say like a couple of things really also, because I'm also when I think about this, I'm thinking a lot of things in Shukri. I'm thinking of the trauma. I'm thinking of all different kind of things really that the story is captured. How do you translate trauma? For instance, I'll give you an example. How do you translate um, certain things really in the Arabic into English to be able to bring it and have people? Of course, we're doing this. People are enjoying literature. They read it. They may have multiples of interpretation. We don't have anything like a footnote. They're enjoying literature. They're not scholarly book. You're not telling them what this really means. But also, it's really important when it comes to Shukri because you're trying to capture all what's going on. One thing I want to say, probably I'll get back to you because you probably have more questions, is also the switch of the narrative voice. I mean, one of the complex, and I'm also talking probably now more now problematics of translation, like things and challenge they faced in doing that. You really find in the same paragraph the switch, in narrative voice, and it's really hard at times. At times you may have to do an ellipsis, or like you may have to do all different kind of things to be able to do that. So that really it was a huge challenge for me to sort of how to deal with it, and how I would say probably, having these are conversations people have, like having like a blunt, direct, spare sentences might be really easy in sort of translation, but one might argue probably it also comes with a lot of complexity because you have a lot of responsibility on your shoulder to actually convey that in the text that you're creating as a new text. Um, um, so I don't know if you want me to still go. I'm more than happy to talk about all different kind of things, but also as far as the reception relative to my translation, it's not really me, to be quite honest with you, is gonna judge that. There are few reviews that are there. It's really for the readers, the letter critics and all that to actually like be able to assess really the work and all that. But for me, I've really spent a lot of time really, as I said again, before even I attempt to do any sort of translation, I would have this like sort of passion, love with the work that I'm actually like reading, but also to feel that I come to a place where I say, yes, I want to sit down and do this work. So for me, whenever I approach the work of translation, it's a labor of love. You really would want to get those specific what I would say like passage to other people to read, and I would leave like the sort of like the assessment, I would say, also like to the other people and people who've actually reviewed the work.
Thanks very much, Jonas. And I'm pretty sure that the audience are now quite thirsty for a flavor, if you would, of this translation. So, may I ask you to pick up a passage and read it from the collection? And can I ask
Absolutely.
for it, if possible, to be from the poets?
Okay, absolutely. I'll do that. Absolutely. So I'll read the poets, and I'm glad you've actually said the poets because I love the poets, and I've had this reading in all different kind of places, and it's really short. So I'll read that. So the poets. The audience awaited the arrival of the procession of poets. There was a platform on the sidewalk of the big street, and books on a table listing the numbers of poets, and a trash can. The audience was silent, all crowded together. Some people moved to the front and craned their necks, looking down the length of the street. More people kept crowding to the street. Their bodies merged as they clung to the edge of the sidewalk. They whispered. The procession of poets appeared surrounded by guards. Six poets, seven, no, eight, nine. There were nine poets. The eyes of the audience met the poets' gaze, and the poets gazed back. Look, their beards are long, their hair thick and fluffy. No doubt they were keeping present in a place where the sun could barely be seen, and there was scarcely enough air to breathe. Never before had there been such an audience. Today its silence seemed solemn. The footsteps of the guards and the poets were clearly heard. The audience could not believe what they were seeing. Even the children were silent, their mouths agape. A woman put her hand over the mouth of a little girl who was sobbing, silently, gently quieting her. The poet's jacket were black, numbered on front and back, the numbers big and white. Four guards ascended the wooden steps to the platform, followed by the procession of poets. Behind them, the rest of the guards. The guards forced them to line up facing the audience. After a moment's silence, the chief of the guard called on poet number one. Come forward and toss your books in the trash can. The poet did not move. The guard called out a second time in a louder voice, a third time even louder. Poet number one stayed fixed in place. The guard looked threateningly at the poet and pointed at the trash can. The guard then moved to the table, snatched two books with black stickers on them, in number one written in white, and tossed them contemptuously into the trash can. The voice of the chief of guards grew increasingly angry as he continued to call out the numbers of the poets. The guard, disposing of the book, spat on one before he tossed it into the trash can. The audience seethed, children cried, shout of protest heard. The guard chief whispered in the ear of the book disposer. All poets refused. Silence anew. The eyes of the poets met the gaze of the audience who gazed back. And thus, just as the poets had ascended the platform, they descended again back to the place where they had come from. So this is the poets. I'm more than happy to say a little about it or have a conversation about it.
Thank you, Jonas. This is beautiful. In fact, if I may trouble you, do you mind telling us why this short story is particularly significant for Choukri?
Yeah. I mean, this is really good, and I'll say that. I mean, I love it in the Arabic as well. And just one of the things about this really tells you even the poets is like to look at the entire thing where you dealing with a lot of things. So the scene that we have an audience, and what's really important to me is having this sort of very important connection between the audience and the poets, because you could also see how they're looking at each other. There is some sort of sympathy there, how they gaze back and forth. And I love how he actually deals with this. And if you would probably give me a minute, I might probably go to the Arabic and tell you how it's in Arabic. Just the way they're looking at each other, I may go to that. But what's really important as well is just to look at sort of like this sort of like bond between the audience and the poets as they are sort of prisoners because you have all these numbers, you have all guards with numbers, but you really have asking them this of tossing your book. So the whole thing of censorship is really a key here as well, because you could see as they are forced to toss their book, they're refusing, there's a silence, and if you think about it, and I'm kind of thinking about all of this right now, is thinking of, one thing would be, the banning of books, which is really important, the burning of books, the sort of the threat of knowledge. And we can also contextualize that in Morocco. And also what's really important that you have all this, they're all coming as we have here, and everybody want to know what's going on. And this is where, say, some people move to the front and crane their necks, looking down the length of the street, and people are crowding to really witness what's going on. And they're really witnessing that there were nine poets there, and we have in the place that they were in prison as they're coming out of their, like, prison cells, and they are there with the guards. The guards are very angry. The voices are being loud, and they're literally asked, or like there is an order command for them to actually do a task. Yet they refused. They did not move. They were called one by one, and at the end they refused. They would not take part in what they're being asked. They wouldn't respond. And look at this, which is really important. The eyes of the poet met the gaze of the audience who gazed back. And you see how this really changed, that we have in the short stories, where he actually make this really shift, which is, I think it's really important in here. If you want, I can look at the Arabic and tell you briefly um, that specific part very quickly. And I will probably just right here. So he goes, عيون الجمهور في عيون الشعراء. عيون الشعراء في عيون الجمهور. And when he goes to the end, عيون الشعراء في عيون الجمهور. عيون الجمهور في عيون الشعراء. And it's really interesting. I mean, this is the also like the entire story, like in Arabic. If we had time, we'd read also the Arabic, but also I want people to get really the flavor of translation. But I would encourage really people to look at this, and people that are bilingual really to look at the Shukri and look at that, because I would always say going back to the original enriches your experience than just solely, as we know, really base it just on a work being translated.
Thank you, Jonas. I do want to talk to you a little bit more about the collection itself. There is a question from the audience that I'd like to pose to
Yes.
you. And I encourage everyone, if they have other questions, to list them in the Q&A tab. And the question is about something that you said earlier in your talk. So the question says, you've mentioned that Choukri doesn't have the stature in Arabic literature that you think he deserves. What do you think he should be remembered for? And what parts of his legacy are most important in your mind?
That's a really beautiful question. I'm really thankful for the person really to ask that question here. And really one of the things when I said like sort of that stature, because I think what really happened to Shukri, and I bring again here Al-Khubz Al-Hafi, because with the publication of Al-Khubz Al-Hafi in 1982, the first, and which he self-financed, by the way, for it to be published, you had an issue of it really being like a ban. And this sort of banning has a lot of conversations. Just want to say that also Morocco, who really banned it. And if we have time, we can sort of chat about that. But it was really off till like 2000. All of us know the whole thing that happened in the AUC American University in Cairo, the entire incident of Khubz al-Hafi, when it was in the syllabus, and there was a huge protest against it, and it's a big scandal really that happened there. Now I'm going back here for this question to think of this. Then really all the people have this sort of like or khubz al-hafi being, where some people like it's pornographic, it's not sort of literature. I'm just giving this conversation. It's all this kind of things. It's too daring. You have a lot of religious sort of clerics that just literally right away, right off the thin. It's not literature. It's all of this. And at that stage, really, you get this sort of like what I would say, like Shukri being really like judged like based on that specific, which is still great. We can talk about that. And that really kind of characterized, and you can talk to a lot of people among the Arab speakers, among even people in terms of literature, and you get all different kind of, and sometimes you really get opposing views, sometimes you get multiple views. I encourage you to do that, because I've done that with a lot of people. A lot of people told me in multiple places, multiple conference, multiple readings. I really my thing, if you go back to the 1960s, I'm thinking about Mohamed Choukri, Mohamed Barrada, Mohamed Zafzaf, and I can bring tons of like really writers. I believe that Choukri was really at the forefront of all the work really to be done as a writer. I mean, all the stuff that we have, I'll give you just like a simple example. A lot of people don't know. He has a beautiful book of literary criticism called غوات الشحر الأبيض. And in one of the articles talk about محاكمة الأدب, the trial of literature. And if you go back to Shukri right there, as I say to a lot of people, you really Shukri that's very engaged, knowing a lot of things about literary criticism. He was well read, and we can go to that. Who was he reading? And also the other thing, which is super important as well in the conversation to have, also you will see the trajectory of Shukri. If you look just the autobiography and you look at Khubz al-Hafi, you look at Zam al-Akhta, you go to Wujuh. Wujuh was the latest thing that Shukri wrote in 2000, and I've translated it it came out from Georgetown University Press. And you really see Shukri, sort of this author that's a little detached. It's not more like sort of the eye that you have in the other work, that you have in the first book of the trilogy and the second, but then you have him really talking about all these faces of Tangier, face that he encountered other faces. It's entirely different. We can get to talk about that and talk of the development of sort of writer. So just to go back to sort of question, not to sort of belabor the point, I feel that he really deserves, as I said again, to be remembered for all his work, being like the sort of the short stories, also thinking of the letter criticism. Nobody talks about his play, for instance, Saada. Not saying that he's a playwright, even the memoir. And one of the things that I feel with Shukri, and I say this right now, a lot of people want things that are sanitized, if that makes any sense. But he is a person that like talk about the ills of societies, like sort of in realism, like explain really what's going on in societies, what I think it's really important. And thinking of, you know, um, you know, children of the street, that's something there. Thinking of sex workers, thinking of impoverished communities, thinking of violence, homelessness. These are all like really topics he actually deals with. To go back again to one thing that I think was really tough, or it was really and Shukri actually spoke about that many times. He was asked, well, why are you talking about all this like sort of subject being like, how he describing things, all those like sexual acts. And in one of the interviews, he said, what would you like me to describe? Butterflies, flowers. I'm describing things as they are. And this is the important. تسمية الأشياء بمسمياتها. He actually he really described things as they are. And just to give an example, الخبز الحافي, really in the start, we have this really difficult scene where the father kills Abd al-Qadir, his younger brother, because he was crying and because he was asking for bread. I think again, just to come back to this, I think Shukri has what I would say his work is really. I think it's time to just sort of reread. And if I've said that many times because I still feel, just to give you a very good example, when it comes to curriculum in the Arab world, in the curriculum in the Arab world, usually people in high school like studying literature, you would have certain books that are even in Morocco by itself that are part of the curriculum. Shukri has not been part of the curriculum. Shukri's work is still actually banned in certain countries in the Gulf. You would not find any of this work, just to give you an example, till now. And this really, um, um, you know, merit discussions. What are some of the reasons behind, where 21st century and his work, um, or his novels, his books still banned in certain Arab countries?
Thank you, Jonas. Thanks so much. I do want to come back to the collection in a second, but the audience is interested in this issue of the popularity or lack thereof of Shukri in certain areas. And so there's a follow-up question, if you are willing to take it. How is Shukri read specifically in Morocco? Is he an influence on young Moroccan writers? Is he read in schools or universities?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So when it comes to school, university, I'll try to answer that right now. You really do see an absence. You really do see absence. So his work is not part of the is not part of CERF curriculum in schools or even the university by itself. which is really problematic, as I said. So you could see things from Mohamed Barrada and others that are part of that, but you wouldn't see. And one of the things that you always think about, if you're thinking about all this sort of taboo subject complicated, there are things that could be sort of like there could be a choice. But I want to address really, really the other part of the question, which I find really fascinating. There has been a lot of engagement with Shukri's work, and this is really good to see. There is a festival that's every single year in Tangier. It's Twiza Festival, and this really Twiza Festival in Tangier is more to celebrate um, the Amazigh culture. Every year they'll have people that are coming from all different parts of the world, but every year they'll have a session in Mohamed Choukri, which they'll would still be kept every single year. And you find a lot of Moroccan, a lot of researchers that will come, people that will come and give talks. But I would definitely say even in social media, there has been a lot of engagement. There has been a lot of engagement with his work. There has been a lot of attention that's really coming. And if you find, I would say in the last probably like 10 years, there's a lot of engagement really from not only Moroccan, I would say also like even like Arab readers actually. And you would find like there are a bunch of things that being published. And when I say published here, I mean by pieces in newspapers and that's really that did a sort of engagement. Also, I would say thinking of all these questions of poverty, of homelessness, of violence, mental bodily violence and all that and poverty, impoverished community, I you would see that a lot of writers, a lot of young writers are really dealing with these topics. And Shukri is really being discussed in a lot of places. So just to tell you that, so yeah, the university schools, you really don't see that, but you see a lot of engagement with a lot of young writers actually. And in a lot of conversations, being in the conversation that are like in social media platform, but also certain festivals. And one of the things I've really been doing myself, honestly, is just to get also this sort of engagement with other people, either being in forums, either being in readings, either being in a conference, to be able really to get people engaged with this work as well. Um, but that's a great question.
Thank you, Jonas. In a second, I'm going to ask you about your favorite story in this collection. But before I do, I want to be a little greedy and ask you for reading a little bit more from the collection itself. And if I may ask you to read from the story of Aisha, um,
That's great.
this one is a
That,
fascinating
yeah,
story, and
yeah,
your translation is fantastic of that short story about the marginalized character who, in a manner that Shukri likes to do, it makes the hero of the story
absolutely,
itself, and
absolutely.
a person who is so big in the story, but who enjoys all kind of little things that then turns them into something bigger.
And that's a
It'd be
really that's
wonderful if
a
you could read some.
absolutely, absolutely. One of the things I want to say, just to say on your comment, which I really like, you would have all like marginalized voices taken forefront or centerpiece in most of his writing. You would look at Violence on the Shore by Maymoon. You look at all different one. I really love this one, and I kind of comment on this one. This is Aisha. When Aisha disappeared from our lives, it was extremely sad. Every evening we'd meet in Café Fuentes. She'd quit prostitution before she turned 30, but she had aged prematurely. She was slim and pale, with crooked, rotten teeth, denied the perfect smile. She used to suppress her acid laughs by lowering her head to her chest. She started to work with Antonio, the coffee manager, as a waitress. Then she became his mistress. There was nothing left in her to make him feel jealous, nor in him to make her jealous either. Not only that, but he also had gangrene in his leg, and that had aged him a lot. He used to spend the night moaning and groaning. Life's miseries bound them to each other. His wife had died in Tangier, and his children had married in Spain. They did not think about him except for occasional letters. Fatima prostituted herself in order to have some money for daily expenses. She was waiting for someone to marry She had lots of dreams but did not talk about them. She bit her nails until she drew blood. She was young, stylish, and modest. She always spoke with her permanently smiling eyes. Her voice was heard only when she was asking for or refusing something. One day, Aisha bought a transistor radio. It delighted her to the point of obsession. In such miserable circumstances, she rarely bought anything new. Antonio might have bought it for her, or maybe she saved the money to buy it. No one asked her how she got it, and she did not say. A transistor radio is considered a luxury, especially among us the poor. So we were drawn to her and her transistor radio. We touched it and inspected it as much as we liked. Even people passing by the cafe congratulated us on having a radio. We would ask Aisha to tune it to this or that station, and she would respond happily to our wishes. She was the queen, and we were her guests. It was my impression that she'd never been as happy as she was that day. That evening, Ali arrived, preoccupied and suffering from the effects of an entire day spent drinking. She ordered coffee and a glass of water and started cursing man. She had a bottle of vodka in her bag. We started to drink the vodka from a single glass discreetly. Antonio and some coffee customers noticed us. They shared in our joyful celebration, smiling from afar. I felt the fire in my chest and drank another shot. We did not dilute the vodka with anything else. That was what we usually did when we wanted to get high and drunk on just a small quantity of liquor. Given into her intense delight, Aisha no longer pursed her lips when she smiled. That night, her decayed teeth were beautiful in their ugliness. When she laughed, she did not lower her head to her chest. Instead, she raised her face and her flat chest shook whenever she coughed. She lowered and raised the radio volume and she pleased, holding it close to her own ear, or to one of ours. The bottle was emptied. Fatima left with a customer. Aliwa took off too, half asleep and tottering. Next day, we learned that she had quarreled with some security guards and they had taken her to a place where she would long for the sea that she loved so much. Aisha lived with Antonio in a small house. She would bring him food from the cafe. Every evening, she would get home before him and wait for him to return so they could spend the night together. Usually, he would bring her a bottle of wine with him. That evening, for the first time, Aisha begged me to walk her home because she was afraid to walk by herself. She was scared about the radio. She did not say as much, but I could sense it. I could feel exhaustion weighting down my body. When I declined to escort her, she gave me a joyless goodbye. Once she had left, I felt so much remorse that I was on the point of dragging my body to catch up with her and walk her home or whatever she wanted. Out of nostalgia, I took a tour around the old alleys in the neighborhood of Dar al Barud. It had been years since I had wandered there. I saw genuine renewal from a small open window. Kulthum voice implored, "Do you remember me, or have you forgotten?" I remember my childhood in the street of Titwan, children in the small yard chasing one another, desperate women and girls noisily filling buckets with water from the public faucet. I was standing under the window, sinking in my memories when I heard, "Choukri, what are you doing here?" I looked up at the window. It was Badr. I hadn't seen him in ages. A cord from above opened the door and I went up. Neither of us had known where the other lived. We would meet in cafes and in the petit suku, or by chance at the homes of friends, staying late into the night. I had never seen him in the new city since he began living there. I entered the small room. On its walls, he had hung personal photos of his childhood and middle and old age by himself, with someone else, or in a group. He was drinking tea, but he went and brought back an open half full bottle of wine and two small glasses. I noticed a framed mid-sized photo My eyes opened wide. Aisha? Aisha at Brothers? How did he know her? Neither of them had mentioned the other, and I've never seen him at Cafe Fuentes. Brother, yes. This photo, what about it? We raised our glasses in a toast. I don't know her, he went on. A friend, Kennedy, brought it and left it here. Then he immigrated to France. He worked in a canteen until he was shot. He was killed? He quarreled with a Frenchman. They got into a fight. That same night, the Frenchman shot him. Would you give me the photo? Since poor Kennedy is dead, he said, you can have it if you want. Do you know her? Yes, her name's Aisha. She died more than 20 years ago. She has died as well. How? She has just bought a transistor radio and spent that evening with us in Cafe Fuentes. On her way home, she was attacked by a drunken bum who wanted to steal the radio. She resisted him and hit him on the head with the radio. He broke a bottle of wine over her head, then stabbed her in the neck and chest. He got up, went over to stand in front of the photo, and looked at it carefully, as if he were seeing it for the first time. Then he sat down. It's so easy for us poor folk to kill each other, he said. When I was about to leave, I asked him again for the photo. I'd like to ask you to leave it here, he said, with genuine sadness. Now it will remind me of poor Kennedy, even when that it did before, more than it did before. He also lived poor in Tangier and died poor in France. So this is the story. I'm sorry it's a little bit longer than the poet, but it's a beautiful story. As you've mentioned earlier, just quickly, you really see this character of Aisha, which is really you see all these marginalized characters really at the forefront of all his writing. And what's really beautiful here, how this transistor radio is a luxury for the poor. And the way the story at the beginning is sort of like describing how the fascination, the obsession of touching it, feeling it as a small thing, and people would pass by, would congratulate them, they put all this channel. But you can also think of this small demise of being killed with another person who is actually poor and people tickling her just to steal that sort of transistor radio. And you could also see this thing between Badr and Shukri and have all of, you know, really sort of this conversation about this character you've not mentioned to me before. But I really feel it's a very good piece. And it's also really sort of represent, if you think about all the other marginalized voices that are dealing with every single thing as being addiction or violence or sexual abuse, all different kind of things really that he deals with, and also the social critique of society because it's also at the forefront. You can also something that we don't talk as much as both, but it's also sort of this anti-colonial, not here, another work of Shukri's sentiment against the sort of the Spanish colonization. But there's a lot to sort of like, untangle.
Thank you, Jonas. Yes, it's a beautiful story, but also your translation is so fantastic of that particular short story. I wonder if anyone in the audience has any questions before I ask mine, because I know we're coming close to time and I don't want to monopolize.
I I can say something about the writing thing because I have really passage I was going to share about the sort of the first. I felt it's really a passage of Shukri when he published his first piece in Alam. But again, but feel free. But I'm more than happy to share that.
No, go ahead, please. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
one of the things coming back to sort of the questions really, which I think are really sort of if you think about it, so as I said before, Violence on the Shore, which was published in 1966, there was at that time, Shukri would meet with Mohamed Al as a Moroccan writer, and that's how Shukri really sort of started. And in Zaman al he talks about this in details. Shukri would frequent a coffee shop, and he would find this guy. Everybody in that coffee shop would show respect to this guy. Shukri, being so curious, he would ask people, "Who's this guy?" And everybody say, "It's Mohamed Sabbagh. He is a writer." Shukri came to the coffee shop. He has few pages. He gave them to Mohamed Sabbagh to read them. Mohamed Sabbagh went, next day came back and he said, "Not bad. Keep on writing." That was really kind of the beginning of it. And he gave him a bunch of things. But remember, really, Shukri, he was a person that read everything. He really read a lot of stuff in Spanish. I mean, we don't have a chance to talk about it, but also amazing fluency in Spanish. But I want to read something from Zaman al from Ed Emery translation when the first piece of Shukri was published, and this is like in Al-Alam. A newspaper published a short prose piece of mine, the stream, the stream of my love, with a picture. I was wildly happy and I got drunk to celebrate my hidden literary talents. I bought several copies of the paper and distributed them among my fellow students to make sure they realized I was now an important person. I was impressed. A son of the shanty town and the human dunghill writes literature and they publish him? So as to increase the sense of my own self-importance, I treated myself to a good jacket and a pair of trousers, plus a selection of bow ties and a fake gold wrist chin. Vanity and inflated self-opinion got the better of me, and I abandoned the popular cafés in the Faddan, Trancados, and the Barrio Malika, and began to frequent the patio of the Hotel Nacional and a dance hall called the Marvel. I began to hang out in at the Café Continental and the barlaba. I shaved once and sometimes twice a day, which is not too good for my skin. I began to use scent to the extent of carrying around a small scent bottle in my pocket. But just to say, and he said I'd shed my old skin and grow a new one. But this is really sort of important as well because at this stage, if you're looking at the picture of Shukri, we may have to do sometimes this another time where we have a PowerPoint to show how Shukri completely started dressing in bow ties and all different kind of things because after publication he wanted to hang out somewhere else way far from the place where he used to be. But just like I always feel that this is kind of like the start really of his sort of writing journey.
Well, I want to thank you, Jonas, for this very interesting conversation. And thank you again for the wonderful translation of the short stories by Mohamed Choukri. I also want to thank Pierce for the invitation and thank the audience for their wonderful engagement. Thank you very much and have a wonderful night, everyone. Take care.